Hi, Andy. How's it going?
Good. How you doing?
Yeah, great. Thank you. And thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today because longtime fan of your work and love what you did on this film because all the costumes are so great. But I know for me as a comic book fan, love seeing the Mighty Thor on screen. And I know on the page, he obviously has quite a simple design in some ways, obviously that silver chest plate. So was that something you considered, I was wondering, or was it always the plan to maybe bring her more in line with the MCU version of Thor?
Oh, to talk about Jane's Mighty Thor, right?
Yeah.
Um, well, it is silver, right? Isn't it? The one that in the movie. Well, yeah. I mean, that one was more of a. Sometimes, we do a whole range. We do a whole range from like comic accurate to like, I did versions where it was more of a dark, almost not black armor, but kind of. But our job in the visual development department is to give them options. So we're gonna do the more comic accurate ones. We're gonna because I did ones the more comic accurate, or I don't know how to describe it, but it has this kind of cuirass, the top part, and there's kind of a separation around the rib cage, and with all these rivets and everything. But they like the ones that, and then I did other versions where it's more like in line with the MCU version of what the original Thor, and that's kind of the one that they pivoted more towards. Because I even did one that has kind of that collar that the comic book
Yeah.
has, but again, they picked the one that was a little bit more along the lines of the MCU version. So that's kind of our job: give them the range, and then they start having their notes of what they like. We start fine tuning to finalize that final design. Like I did versions giving her the chiclet armor arms, or having the one sleeve like in the comics. But at the end of the day, Taika wanted to have both arms, both of Jane's arms, her guns showing. So that's it's not a wrong decision.
No, well, absolutely. I loved how it turned out. And I also loved, obviously, Thor's new costume, very flashy design, very
Yep.
bright colors, which I know something is obviously, Taika brought that to the franchise with Ragnarok. But was that costume, obviously, that Walt Simonson inspiration, was that something you've been hoping to bring to the screen for a while? Or was it something Taika really wanted because he has almost opened the door to this very colorful take on Thor?
Yeah, you know what? I don't think he ever mentioned that. It's called the God armor, I think, right? The God armor in the 80s. I think it was in mid 80s. So he never mentioned specific reference. He just said he just wanted Thor, an extreme version of Thor, and then of course knowing the story that essentially he sees Jane and he's like, oh, I'm not gonna be one upped by Jane. I'm a little insecure. So this is why I'm looking this way. So for me, I grew up in the 80s reading Marvel comics. So that's my period, the mid 80s. So I remember that armor, bright blue, gold, really big. Everything was big and ostentatious and big. The bigger his cape was bigger than ever. So that was my inspiration. So I took that, I ran with it, also with the language of the MCU. We did all different versions of that, like how much metal, everything. Even down to how he transforms from a more toned down version of that to a very extreme version of that. So I did some animations of showing how, like, in the beginning he'd only have like one shoulder piece, but once he goes into his, once he transforms after he sees Jane, he has four pieces of, like, shoulder armor, more gold than ever. His every piece gets bigger, the capes gets longer, the helmet comes on, that crazy helmet, even with a little bird at the top of it. And then even in the animation, I even made the hair kind of grow even longer at the very end. Not all that stuff made it into the film, but that's kind of the process, and it's really fun presenting those things and in a big room with Taika and all the execs, and seeing their reactions.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And you mentioned the helmet there, and I thought it was great in this movie. We obviously, because in the comics, Jane does wear the helmet, obviously to protect her identity, and it is used a lot in the film. And I know Chris Hemsworth very briefly puts on a helmet again, which is a very cool design. So how much fun was it for you to explore those and to play around with those ideas for them?
Yeah, because I'm a comic book fan, anytime we get to do helmets, that's like some of the most fun. Because at the end of the day, I'm a kid reading comic books. It's all about their secret identity and them wearing some kind of mask or helmet, right? And that's how you kind of identify. When you're a kid, you're going to put on some mask. That's what you do. So anytime we get to do, and there's not a lot of helmets in this, in the MCU, right? But anytime you get a chance to do that, that's really fun. So being able to do the Jane helmet as well as the Thor helmet, and it's always fun playing off of designs. So while I was designing the Jane's Mighty Thor helmet, I'm also designing Thor's Extreme Thor helmet. So kind of comparing and contrasting. Obviously Jane is going to be mainly silver with those kind of burgundy color, kind of to play off of each other, the gold and that color. And then with Thor's, it's going to be like pretty much all gold with a lot of blues here and there. So yeah, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I bet. And I did really enjoy as well, right at the end of the film, we see that Thor gets another new costume. It's almost like a black and gold, I almost thought, in that final scene, him and Love. So what was some of the thought process behind that costume? Or was it just you just needed to find a slightly different look for him after he's moved on from the flashiness of what we see earlier in the film?
You know what? I've been meaning to look into it, but as far as I know, it's the same costume. I don't know if it's I'm not 100% sure if it's black and gold, because there was no, at least if that happened, then it would happen in the VFX like post, like when they're filming and they're editing, and maybe there was a decision in VFX to make it black and gold. But to me, I still saw it as the same costume, but I don't know. I could be wrong. So I don't know actually that answer.
I need to go check my TV settings, obviously. But again,
yeah.
regardless,
because it wasn't like a daytime setting, so it is more contrasty. But as far as I know, it's the same costume. But yeah, I don't know. I could be wrong.
Great to have that. Yeah, great to have that cleared up. And gotta say, some of your recent work in the MCU, obviously the Mighty Thor, very comic accurate, Scarlet Witch. We've seen her now in a very comic accurate costume, and you have been part of the MCU for so long. Have you found, I know the costumes have always borrowed heavily from the comics, but as the franchise has obviously become more successful and maybe Marvel have had more freedom in that sense, have you found you can borrow more from the comics, or is it just a natural evolution for characters like Jane and Wanda, do you think, to have these very comic inspired costumes?
I've heard like, some internet chatter about that, them saying like that in recent times is more comic accurate, but I don't know. Since I've been working here since 2010, I worked on the first Captain America and then pretty much everything since. I feel like we're just doing the same thing that we've always done. Like, when I see that some of the early costumes, like that's quite comic accurate, right? A lot from Captain America to Iron Man to Hulk to Thor. I know, and even Black Widow and Hawkeye, like a lot of all the originals, they're pretty comic accurate, right? Of course, there's going to be some characters throughout the years that veered away from some of that. Like, you could say Ant-Man is quite a departure, right, from the original comics. But I don't know. For me, I feel like we're continuing what it is. So there's no mandate to be like, oh, let's be more comic accurate through the years. There's nothing like that, because to me, and I think to the filmmakers, nothing's changed. Like it really comes down to the filmmaker. There's two things: the filmmaker and the script. So something like Scarlet Witch, I worked on Age of Ultron, and I was working on designs of her because I'm a fan reading comics in the 80s. My first design I ever did, not reading the script, was a comic accurate version, but I did it. And then I read the script and I'm like, okay, there's no way they're going to pick this because it doesn't make sense, right? She's not a superhero or a super villain or anything like that. She's just a Sokovian. So I did it, even with a crown. And of course, in that meeting, they said, oh, nice try, right? It doesn't make sense, right? And then eventually, so I was like, the fan in me was disappointed that she just wears like a red jacket, nods to the comic, but she's still just wearing real world clothing. But then you see her, and then did an update design in Civil War. And then when we got to WandaVision, that's when I read the script. I talked to the producer, Mary Lavanos, and I'm like, this is like, there's a plan, right? There's a reason why. And then now we get to see, she was never called the Scarlet Witch. She was always just called Wanda Maximoff. And now she becomes the Scarlet Witch. That is not comic accurate, right? That's not how the comics go. She was called the Scarlet Witch from the get-go. But the genius of what Kevin and what these creators do, and we help contribute to that, is like, then we get to see this full journey that she becomes a Scarlet Witch. It justifies that she has a comic accurate costume. So it becomes more valuable than if we just saw her from the get-go as wearing this Scarlet Witch costume that we see in WandaVision or Multiverse of Madness. So yeah, we're just, nothing has really changed, to answer your question.
Yeah, no, that's awesome to hear. And I love seeing these characters evolve. And of course, big debut in this film is Hercules. So was that a character you got to work on at all? Because if we're talking comic accurate costumes, what an awesome look for Brett Goldstein there to be wearing that costume. What was that process like?
Yeah, I got to design that one, which was really fun because right before I designed it, I just finished watching Ted Lasso. So, and so I was like, I love that show. And then, first time I saw Brett Goldstein as a character. So I was like, oh my gosh, he's going to play, Hercules. So I went to designing that. And again, growing up in the 80s, reading 80s, 90s Marvel comic books, he was part of the Avengers. So yeah, anytime we get to introduce a new character into the MCU, like every single time we've done that, like while I'm painting and designing, I'm just like a kid again, being like, you always have to kind of stop after a while, being like, oh my gosh. I mean, it's not guaranteed that, you're going to be the one to design, because there's a lot of artists that do amazing work. But, you're just the fact that you're contributing and doing designs of that character. So that was really fun, but then it's just a question of how comic accurate, everything, every time we do a design, how comic accurate can you be? So I did a lot of different versions, and then, one got picked, and then we got to see it in the end credit. That was such a treat to be able to see that. And it was so fun to be able to be in the audience, like whether it's at the premiere or, when I watched it with after the premiere, just with a regular audience, to see the reactions, or that's always, the final cherry on top.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Well, Andy, thank you so much for your time. I loved everything you've done in this film, loved everything you've done up until now in the MCU, because you guys just knock it out the park. And it's great to see Marvel Studios put the spotlight on you, because I think the work you do behind the scenes is just phenomenal and invaluable. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it. It means a lot.